Tage, let's move on here too. The Commanders against the Eagles, which I think is going to be such a fun game. I want to start with the Commanders offense against the Eagles defense. I think you could maybe say that's a more fun matchup between the two sides of the ball here. They've, of course, played twice this year. In week 16, Jalen Hurts went out with a concussion. There was still, I think, a bunch of good film to learn from there where the Commanders offense, I thought, did a good job against the Eagles defense in the red zone specifically. And Fangio, from a defensive perspective, with some of their zone matches in the red zone this season, I think they have struggled a bit at times when offensive had, smart ways to kind of stress the rules. There was a touchdown where it's like a weird 12 men on the field. Darius Slay is running off the field. It ends up in a touchdown on an uncovered receiver. So are you banking on that again? Probably not. You get some situations where Jaden Daniels is extending on 3rd and 4th downs. He's making guys miss. It's really fun to, I think, watch Daniels continue to grow, where at this point, it just feels like, man, we can't blitz this guy. Like, we're talking about Mahomes and Allen and like, oh, well, do you blitz him? Do you not blitz him? The way that Jaden Daniels is playing right now, where he's taking 1 sack in the last 2 games after having a season where he's at a 20% pressure to sack rate, which, I mean, that's not a low number in terms of everyone else on this season. So the way that he's improved, the way I think Cliff Kingsbury does deserve credit, where you're getting a bunch of quick throws, you're getting an offense that is playing on time, you're playing up tempo to get positive looks, you have RPOs where you have kind of that gap run scheme that can attack you to one direction of the field, that quick throw in the opposite direction of the field. So that really, really stresses you, I think, as a defense going into this one. Missing Sam Cosmi, who was hurt in the Lions game at right guard. That is a real big injury, thinking about who the Eagles are going to have lined up over that right guard spot a bunch. What do you have on your mind about the Commanders offense?
Yeah, so when you look at the Commanders offense there, I thought you did a great job of summarizing them. Like, on the season, they're 4th in EPA per play, top 5 when both passing and rushing. And you mentioned the sack rate. They're 20th in terms of sack rate right now. But what I think is like interesting about that is like they're first in scramble rate, and you can check this out on Sumersports.com's quarterback page. Like, Jaden Daniels has generated 51.9 total EPA on scrambles this season, which is first place. Josh Allen is at 32.6 in second place. So Jaden Daniels is almost added 19 expected points added over Josh Allen in terms of scrambling. So, like, do you just make that trade-off if you're the Commanders, of like, okay, like, we understand we'll take sacks sometimes because our quarterback scrambles so much? And I do think that the answer is yes there, especially when you get this heater that Jaden Daniels has been on, where he's only taken 1 sack in 2 games, but is still scrambling at a high rate. Like, you really see the upside of that. Overall structure of the offense, really good when using play action. They use it at a high rate. Teams have liked to play man coverage against them because they haven't really seen a second pass catcher emerge that can truly beat man. And the Commanders are really good against zone because of the way that Daniels is able to find his pass catchers in those pockets of the zone. But McLaurin is by far the wide receiver 1 on this team. Zach Ertz has had some nice moments. De'Ami Brown has stepped up as of late, so you're hoping like those are the guys that can kind of beat the Eagles man coverage or some of their match principles that they'll throw out. And they are a gap rushing team, like you mentioned, and I do think missing Sam Cosmi will be significant in terms of what they want to do in both the run and the pass game. But hopefully they can overcome that. Something I thought was interesting was from the first 2 matchups, Jaden Daniels killed the blitz. He saw it 20 times, had a 50% success rate and a 0.36 EPA against the Eagles in when blitzed. On plays where he didn't see a blitz, he dropped down from a 50% success rate to a 43% success rate, and his EPA also dropped there as well. So I thought that was interesting, and it is cool that they have played twice, before playing in this game. So wanted to ask you, like, based on the first matchup we saw earlier in the season on the Thursday night game, where both offenses struggled for most of the game, but especially the Commanders offense versus, the most recent matchup just a couple of weeks ago where the Commanders had a lot of success. Like, what do you think is the game that will be more predictive of what we actually see on Sunday?
When I was rewatching both of the matchups from earlier this season, certainly in the first game, like Jaden Daniels, he was injured. I don't want to make that as an excuse, but he clearly was not moving in the same way I think that he is now. He looked a little bit more uncomfortable on some of those throws. I do think the Eagles did a really good job in zone coverage, just totally suffocating some of those receivers, finding ways to be moving around at a high level. I think you can look at that second game from a Commanders offense versus the Eagles defense perspective and say, oh, well, Chauncey Gardner Johnson gets thrown out of that game. Slay gets injured and like these different types of things. In that second game, though, Daniels was really comfortable throwing that outside vertical ball. He had one against Slay, one against Quignon, or Quignon, I think, was he was really sitting on an in-breaking route before the receiver goes out to that pylon area. So I think the second game feels probably a little bit more like realistic. At the same time, though, Tage, you get like this. I mean, I think it was like 4th and 8, or like a long scramble where you're kind of moving to
Yeah.
your right, and now you're beating a bunch of guys. So how predictable is that, or how predictive, sorry, is that fourth down conversion rate? I feel like I could have said that all year, and they're just at a historic fourth down pace. So, I mean, I'm going to need to ask you, and we'll talk about this from the Eagles' offensive perspective as well. Like, does does being predictive matter at all for these games where it's like what Jaden Daniels looks like next year is just a different question. I would love to see him grow in certain ways. I'd love to see the offense move in different directions. But like what he is right now is like, I mean, it's like a generational rookie heater. Like it really is, I think, something special to watch. I don't know if I'm letting too many irrational thoughts into my mind and removing logic, because it just feels like when I'm watching Jaden Daniels, there is just something there. Like it really, really is. Like the throw to Johnny Brown. Yes, I can point to, like he understands how to process, I think, defenses quite well. I think he's getting through his reads when he needs to in an offense that is prioritizing and putting a lot of emphasis on that first read in good ways. I just feel like, applying logic to Jaden Daniels at times, it's a little bit of a fruitless endeavor.
Yeah, I mean, it's something where like, I mean, you have to understand kind of, even with your prior, that is still holding more weight with Jaden Daniels than it would be for, say like Jalen Hurts in the same game. Like you have to be able to update that, be able to put him at the spot that he's playing right now, because he is playing so well. And like something that even happened in the first game that I don't think will happen in this game is like the Commanders had 5 turnovers in that game. Like Brian Robinson had one of the worst games of his career, probably the worst game of his career. So like that's something that probably won't carry over into this game. But like I do feel like Jaden Daniels' play as a whole can carry over because of just how well he's playing. What we've seen from him this year against a variety of different defenses, and what he continues to do in these playoffs.
Tage, it's hard for me, right? Like I work at like a football analytics company. I love watching the film. There's just times in the season when you're looking at it, it's like there's just a feeling that when Jay Nails gets the ball at the end of the game, like you feel uneasy, and that like I don't
Yeah.
want to have the analysis be that. At the same time, I think like how he appears and is cool and is calm and his comfort. I do think there's something to be said there where it feels like he operates the offense really, really well in those high leverage situations. So I mean, I think it is incumbent on the Eagles to, I think, score early and push things in that direction. Tage, we of course have to talk about our guy Vic Fangio, stats and scheme defensive coordinator of the year, and the Eagles defense. I liked some of the late adjustments that Fangio had against the Rams, where that second to last kind of 2-minute drive, there was like I think too much air in the coverage. You're a little bit off in your zone, so that second or that real last drive, you're moving to more man coverage. You get the Jalen Carter fake stunt, which pretty much creates a free rusher from a defensive tackle, which is really, really fun. The Oren Burks filling in for Nakobe Dean was, it was certainly passable. I was happy with it, even though McVay, I think, did a lot to find ways to conflict him. It's a difficult spot playing linebacker, of course. And Isaiah Rodgers was playing for Quinyon Mitchell. A little bit of a tough time, I think, at the catch point. Decent in coverage, decent in closing on one of those examples. It sounds like Quinyon Mitchell should be back in this game for what I think you could say is the top defense in the league.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Like the first in EPA per play allowed on the season, and that was even with the beginning of the season being an adjustment period of learning the Vic Fangio defense, which now most Eagles players seem to probably have the same understanding that you have of his defense, but also just like they weren't getting turnovers at the beginning of the year. Now that's changed, more recently, and they've just been really good on a down to down basis. Something that's really impressed me about the Eagles, and I've mentioned this a couple times on here, is just like how good they are against motion and play action. Like these are both things that offenses run to really throw off defenses, and the Eagles have just like shown just really just like the entire defense is just like playing really sound when they have to face off against those two things. In particular, like they're very good against four wide receiver sets. So like when teams get into 11 personnel, they put the four receivers out there. The Eagles have been really good against that. They've been a little bit less good against some heavier sets like two tight ends, but teams haven't tested them there a ton. So I wonder if Cliff Kingsbury has noticed that coming into this game. And then, like you mentioned, I do think that the Nakobe Dean injury is going to affect their middle of the field defense. They were fourth in the league in terms of EPA per pass allowed over the middle of the field this year, and replacing Dean with Oren Burks probably moves them down those rankings a bit. Something I thought was really interesting from Ben Baldwin, who tweeted this out the other day, was there's only been like four quarterback performances this year that have like actually been good against the Eagles defense. You had Kirk Cousins of all people in week 2. I was at that game, was something pretty crazy to see when he led that final drive. Baker Mayfield in week 4, that was a really fun game. Joe Burrow in week 8, and then Jaden Daniels in week 16. Like those have been the standout performances from quarterbacks against the Eagles defense. The rest of them, like they've played some really good quarterbacks, like Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels in his first game against them, Jordan Love, Matthew Stafford, in that most recent game. Like they've done a really good job of shutting down a lot of those the quarterback play there.
It's so impressive. I just think like Vic Fangio's feel on a game is at such a high level where I can think back to watching this Eagles unit last year and just seeing like, well, what are your kind of drive to drive adjustments? And I'm not going to pretend like, oh, like they should have done this, they should have done that. But you can see on film when you have a call that is not working and then it is immediately switched. Like it has really turned in a different direction. Off of a few other things that you said, talking about how they deal with motion and play action. I really like when they're playing against motion, it feels like they'll still have underneath defenders that it's like, yes, like you're playing your coverage responsibility at this point in the NFL's history. Like people are running that motion and then sending it out the sideline. Like you're covering that, but you're still finding different ways to kind of take away different areas of the field just a little bit. I think it's a little bit, I think, discipline against play action. It does feel like assignment and responsibility sometimes against play action where they can play with one of their linebackers being a little bit more attacking. They can play with one of their linebackers being a little bit, slower to it. I think they get good tells in terms of tendencies that are in terms of formations, just like when a tight end is off the ball, when a tight end is on the ball. Like, what does that mean for an offense's attack? So it's just been really impressive to watch all season. They're so close to the Super Bowl. It's such a big test. It's really, really is a big test where you've played the Commanders twice. You're able to generate turnovers in both of those games. You're able to you could say like, oh yeah, the Eagles are one drop pass away from winning that game against the Commanders. At the same time, the defense did not do enough in that game. So I think the unit overall, where Chelsea Gardner-Johnson was ejected in that first game. Like I think it's going to be a really, really chippy. Like people are. I mean, it's going to be at the link. It's going to be obviously a home game for the Eagles. They're really going to want to try and prove something there. What are you looking at as a positive matchup for the Commanders' offense?
Yeah, I mean, I do hope for Eagles fans out there, which you are not one of. But like if they play Meek Mill before the game, like they did against the Vikings in the 2017 NFC Championship, it should be a big advantage for them there. But something that you're something saying that?
Which is when you were at the Bucks game, were you there? Like, do like the green light show? They play the Rocky song. Like you didn't feel it in your soul.
Oh, so yeah, I was at the Falcons game, and I actually thought the coolest thing that they did the entire game was that eagle that flies around before the game, like the live eagle, and it's like able to like return to its handler. I was like amazed at that. Like I didn't know eagles could do that. I didn't know that they were that like able to fly around the stadium, like hype up the crowd, and then just like return to their handler.
I mean, that Eagle's name is Lincoln. Paige, can we put some respect on Lincoln's name? Lincoln is flying around tough. At the last game against the Rams, they put the Jared Verse quote, and then they cut to Jared Verse. I
Oh
love
yeah.
that. Like it's just really, really fun. I mean, the scoreboard or the board operator there. It's a good job there. What do you think here is going to be maybe a good job for the Commanders' offense, Tage?
Yeah, something that's advantageous for the Commanders' offense is Jaden Daniels is scrambling, right? So, you look. We mentioned earlier, like most EPA generated on scrambles this season. The Eagles have actually like they rank top 5 in basically everything, at least top 10. They've given up the 15th most EPA to scrambles this year. So, you've mentioned like Eagles strong interior defensive line led by Jalen Carter. Like edge rushers have been a little bit weaker, just in terms of talent, in terms of play this year. Like I really can see Jane Daniels getting around the edge on some plays in this game, and being able to convert some crucial third downs, or just get enough yards on 2nd and 10 to make it third and manageable, for using his legs on some dropbacks in this matchup.
Yeah, the scrambling in this one, I think the whole game it'll be something that really is stressing Fangio out. And when you're dealing with a quarterback that can move, right, you have a few options. Are you going to spy that quarterback? I think you're taking that's not, I think, Fangio's general approach. You're taking either a coverage player out, or if it's a 3-man rush with one of your defensive linemen being a spy, you're taking a rush player out. You can play, I don't know, man coverage with the spy. Again, I don't think like a spy is something that Fangio really wants to lean on. The way that they'll do they stunt a lot up front as I think a way to augment their defensive line, their pass rush unit just a little bit, especially when, the offense wants to slide towards Jalen Carter, get a center and a guard on him so you can kind of use that against the offense. In their zone coverage, like Oren Brooks, it is really going to be a big job for Oren Brooks to be able to deal with Jaden Daniels in the open field. The first game they played, Nakobe Dean had this really, really sweet tackle of Jaden Daniels on a scramble in the open field. So you're hoping that you can get that. And then, I mean, we talked about how good Jaden Daniels is against the blitz. You can sometimes, use pressure to attack a moving type quarterback where you're closing an escape lane a little bit. Are you going to send 6-man rushes? I'm not. I'm not really sure. Again, that's not what Fangio does. Like he is a 4-man rush type player. If we're our type coach, if we're saying that Jay Nails is really, really good against blitzes. I mean, Fangio, he's been in the league he's been coaching for like 40 plus years. He leans on percentages and tendencies. Like he is an analytics guy, I
Mhm.
think, deep down there, even if you won't say it too loud. Actually, there was a quote this season where he's like, "I have my own analytics." I love that. I mean, Fangio, obviously, again, he's the defensive coordinator of the year for stats and scheme. It's hard to come at him when he has funny comments like that. What do you think is a good matchup for the Eagles defense from that perspective?
Yeah, so the Eagles will have a pretty big advantage in this game when the Commanders are passing short, so like under 5 air yards. Like this will be a big win for the Eagles defense when this happens, because not only does it mean they had taken away Daniels throwing downfield, but also they are really good at tackling, so they should be able to close on these short passes really well. There probably won't be a Terry McLaurin screen that he takes to the house 50 yards out from the end zone. The Eagles rank first for short passes this year. They aren't that great when defending intermediate passes. We even saw that in their Week 16 matchup, where on passes over 10 air yards, Jaden Daniels was 7 for 13, 169 yards, 4 touchdowns. So he averaged 13 yards per attempt on those passes. I think he only had 3 incomplete passes in the 5 to 15 air yard area of the field. And so the Eagles can force the Commanders to throw short, force them to throw into some of their screens or check downs to Eckler. I do think it'll be a lot better for the Eagles defense than it usually is for other defenses when that situation happens to them.
Taste the end of the Rams game really felt like this is the Jalen Carter game. Like if you look back at it, that's really something that you remember from that. Carter has the opportunity again in this game where we mentioned Sam Cosby not being in at that right guard spot, of course, having that unfortunate injury against the Lions. It's just a situation where he really can take over a game. Like he absolutely has that ability. I just mentioned we saw that against the Rams. He plays like 95% of these snaps. Like he is playing so long into the game. I'm interested to see how, he's dealing with just the up tempo attack where the Commanders are constantly getting into no huddle. Carter's obviously in awesome shape because he is doing that. There is probably going to be a situation where he is a little bit tired, just like that's right. That is natural. That is going to happen when you're playing all those snaps. But the splash plays that he has in this game, it can just ruin an offense. So I think that's something that I'm also looking at. And then what, Cliff Kingsbury's plan on the opposite side, knowing that is whether it's, you again, you're sliding the center and the guard that way pretty much every single time. And then being confident, a little bit on the islands, I think it could be a big Nolan Smith game. Like when you're a pocket cruncher in the way that Nolan Smith is against a quarterback that can move, that can be a really, really positive thing. So I think that Jalen Carter spot, it's going to be fun to watch in this game. I think some other fun things. I mean, the Jaden Daniels play extension, it's going to be
Mhm.
fun. I feel like I've said this like 6 times on this podcast, and I have to say it again because like taking one sack in 2 games based on how many times they were pressured, based on how many times the Lions wanted to blitz. That is really, really impressive. I think it shows maturity. I think it shows confidence. It shows that he is just playing in that specific way on a high level. I would love for him to continue to carry that sack avoidance into the future, into next season, and hopefully through a long career for him. What are you looking at as just a fun matchup in this game?
Yeah, I'm excited to see from like a personnel perspective what Cliff Kingsbury kind of reaches into his bag and is able to pull out. Like talked about how Eagles defense is really good against 11 personnel, still good against 12 personnel, but just not as good. So maybe you put 2 tight ends out there and really try to affect the Eagles that way, or maybe you go into some pony personnel, get 2 running backs out there. They used all 3 of them against the Lions with Brian Robinson, Eckler, and Jeremy McNichols. So maybe some 2 running back sets really try to stretch the Eagles linebackers since we know that Oren Burks is filling in for Nakobe Dean there.
I'm really interested to see what Kingsbury's plan is there, just in their, kind of gap scheme run games. Like, how much are you going to test Burks, whether it's following a puller or really being able to kind of feel things out through the backfield? I do think in the first game, the Commanders had a few good ways to get to the flat with a running back kind of from the opposite side of the formation. And I mean, force Burks to keep making plays just because of, potential defensive player of the year candidate in my mind. Zach Bond has been playing so well. So make the other guy make a play there as well. I'm interested to see when the Commanders do get heavy because they love to get heavy. They love having a second tight end on the field. Fangio wants to match that with nickel, where it kind of becomes like a 4-3 when Cooper DeJean gets
Mm-hmm.
bumped in. They're going to fit the run just in a touch of a different way than when they're in their kind of base looks. I think that Fangio doesn't want to get caught in base personnel where the Commanders can go up tempo and kind of attack you in that way. So that will be just another thing. We're kind of thinking about it a little bit from the opposite side as well. I am really curious what Fangio's red zone rules, what his plan is overall, where, one way to remove like the uncertainty of some zone matchups, you just play man coverage, right? Like you're like, you have that guy no matter what, as opposed to now you have to drop into this area. You have to feel what the route patterns are. I think that's going to be something to look at, the red zone area. And then finishing pressures is going to be something where
Mm.
we've talked about it a bunch, right? Like I think that Jalen Carter on one side, you're going to have Milton Williams, defensive tackle, who has, I think, just earned himself a lot of money this year. He's going to be singled up a lot of times. I think him over the Commander's left guard, that's a situation where you'd hope that as an Eagles person, like you'd hope that you're able to create pressure there. I want to see what Sweat has on the outside in this game. Just like adjusting your rush against a quarterback that can beat you on the ground, it is really, really tough because you're used to a specific aiming point, you're used to your specific steps, your kind of approach with the way that you're attacking with your hands, but now you really have to worry about that. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Anything you want to close off on? Just something you're looking forward to here?
Yeah, I mean, just Jalen Carter. Like you mentioned, like I thought you laid it out well. Like people will remember, the way he took over that last drive, that last red zone stand against the Rams, like for the rest of his career. But like you said, like he has another opportunity to do that in this game, where I think he's the best player on this Eagles defensive line by like a decent margin. So like he can definitely really just affect the a Commander's offense line that's played well this year, but obviously is missing one of their guards in this game.
Paige, I thought we were done with the preview. We actually still have one whole side of the ball here. We have the Eagles offense against the Commanders defense. Of course, the Eagles offense has a fantastic run game. I think Saquon Barkley does a good job of making you pay when like you're not in the exact spot that you need to be. You had a situation for the Rams where 2 guys kind of get caught up a little bit in the same gap. He can just pop outside and really cut up inside too to just make you pay. And if you're a safety in the open field, you're just not tackling Saquon Barkley. So that is a lot of fun. In the Week 16 matchup against the Commanders, of course, Jalen Hurts was out with that injury after a little bit of that first quarter. At the same time, the Commanders were really able to, take advantage of the run blocking, I think, a little bit, where, certainly Hurts has a lot of gravity. The way that he affects the run game at that second level is going to be significant. But, Jalen Hurts, he's practicing, I think, or they have a walkthrough technically listed. We're recording this earlier in the day on Wednesday. What his mobility is, it is really going to be important. I think that changes the way, that Joe Witt wants to use Wagner and Luvu, where I really enjoy watching, of course, I'm Joe Witt's calling the plays, right? So you have that, and then the Dan Quinn kind of tree overall. But what Witt has done with Wagner and Luvu, where you're sending one guy's kind of leaning in one direction, just using them both as weapons in the run game has been fun. Because I think the Commanders want to make it a run game where it becomes one-on-one with the tight end. At the same time, in that Week 16 matchup, Dallas Goedert wasn't playing in that game, so you think that Goedert should be, a little bit more of a higher level run blocker than the two players that were in the first game. It's just hard not to have like all eyes on Jalen Hurts in this matchup. What is the scheme going to look like overall with an injured Hurts? Are they able to manufacture ways for him to get the ball out quick, for him to throw on time, for you to kind of keep things moving in that direction? So I think a lot to monitor for the Eagles offense. Tage, do you think AJ Brown's gonna, have like the book's gonna be dry this week, right? Last week we said it's in the snow, it's a little bit tougher. Are you gonna get a waterproof copy? What are you gonna have to do in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the weather being nicer because I really thought it affected last week's game will be nice just to actually watch this game. And also AJ Brown can bring the book. Doesn't have to cover it. To keep it from getting wet. So that will also be very helpful for him. But yeah, going into this Eagles offense, I really want to just like take a little bit step back from the particular matchup and just like talk about how good this running game is, because they have had such a good year running the ball, especially with what Saquon Barkley has been able to do. And I love that Next Gen Stats tracks, how often players hit 15 miles an hour or over on runs, because that is such a big predictor of success on a rush, is like how fast the running back is hitting the hole. And when you're the Eagles, you have the combination of this offensive line that is just opening up these massive holes for Saquon to run to. And then also just like his quickness and acceleration and his ability to fit through the hole, to kind of maneuver his body and really get to the second level quickly. Like the combination of those two things happening has been so cool to watch in this offense this year. Another thing that like should be pointed out is, so Next Gen Stats has a rush yards model. I don't love the model. I could spend like a long time talking about it, but I do think it's directionally correct on plays. And Saquon Barkley has had a 4.3 expected yards per carry this season, which is the 10th highest amongst the 41 qualifying running backs. He's at a plus 1.6 rushing yards over expected, which is only behind Derrick Henry. And so I think that, if you use some of the more modern tools that some assumers data scientists would be using, like his rushing yards over expected would drop a little bit, but it still just goes to show, like, even with the data that this model is trained on, like expected rushing yards is high, but then he makes it even higher just with what he's been able to do as a rusher. When you go over to the pass game, yeah, I mean, like Hurts' injury will be massive to follow in this game. Like he doesn't really scramble like he used to. He's been holding on to the ball for a while. Like I think that the best version of this pass game can be him getting the ball out quickly. We just like he's like been decently productive in passes under 2.5 seconds this year. But something I thought was interesting was Eagles did pretty good using play action in the first two games. Like that includes the Kenny Pickett game as well. Like their success rate increased, their EPA increased. So maybe we see some of that from Kellen Moore in this game, because they definitely got the Commanders on that.
The Eagles passing him, right? It just has to be talked about. I think the sack avoidance point has been a bit frustrating the entire season, where they, I think, after a few weeks, took an approach where like it is a little bit of a turnover avoidant passing game, where it
Mhm.
feels like you have some 50-50 situations where maybe Hurts is being either coached or told or encouraged to just be like, hey, look, like we're just trying to live to get another Saquon Barkley carry. So you have a good in terms of, hey, we're avoiding turnovers. Those sacks do really add up, and that I think makes it a tough situation where the Eagles interior offensive line didn't have the best day against the Rams. I give them certainly a little bit of the benefit of the doubt in terms of like you were playing on an ice rink. That is a little bit tough to have to do that against a Rams defensive line that was playing really, really well. I think this is a real opportunity for Kellen Moore to put his stamp on this game, where I think we will be able to see if the offensive, particularly passing game design, has ways to help Jalen Hurts out. Whether it's, I mean, Hurts like was moving decent on some of those boots. Later in the game, they went to pistol to do it after his injury. Now, how mobile he's going to be, obviously, we should be able to tell that. We'll, unfortunately, like you will find that out just based on kind of how he's moving. But if he can move decent, I mean, can we get him on the move? Like, let's do that. Let's run the like, can you get him under center? Like, is his knee confident enough and pushing
Mhm.
off when you're kind of have now under center fake, because if you can't involve him consistently in the run game, it's a little bit of an issue. So is more using RPOs? Are you using a receiver kind of one side of the formation to the other side of the formation in the flat as a way to still create conflict, even if Hurts can't be a ball carrier? Then if you're a Commander's defense, in my mind, I mean, even if Hurts is 100%, if it's a read type play, make Hurts keep it. Just because, like, do I want Saquon Barkley to carry the ball, or do I want Jalen Hurts to carry the ball? Where, I mean, Hurts had that awesome run against the Rams. Right? When Hurts is going downhill, that is a real positive situation. I just think if you're choosing between the two, you'd rather find a way to loop a linebacker over the top to Jalen Hurts. Obviously, you don't know exactly what the offensive play call is going to be. Kellen Moore has done a decent job in switching who is the responsibility in terms of like when they run that kind of counter scheme, they have counter bash where it's the running back going away from the blocking scheme. Now you're just really messing with read type players on the defensive side. So it's going to be fascinating, Tage. It really is. What his time to throw is going to be a real big deal for me. Obviously, it doesn't tell you the entire story. Obviously, that's situational, but are you manufacturing smart quick game plays where it feels like sometimes the quick game, it's, pick a side type reads where it's just a little bit too easy, I think, for the defense to erase multiple threats on the offense. It's going to be film that did it's going to be fascinating. Tage, there's going to be so many fascinating things in both of these matchups. I think there's a lot to like, and part of that is because of how the Commanders defense played against the Lions. I mean, they obviously let up a bunch of yards. The Lions run game was able to get going. You let up 31 points. Ben Johnson is really, I think, in his bag. Some people said, a little too far in his bag. No, neither of us said that specifically. It's an opportunistic defense, certainly. I thought the way that he was calling some of those zone coverage rotations was cool, where it just feels like at this point in the season, they have a pretty expansive pass defense menu where, I mean, they're going to try and create tackles for loss on early downs. They're going to try and get you to 3rd and 6+, which is just like a really tough situation for the Eagles at this point along the year. And I think that it should be a time for them to lean on some of those rotations that they use against the Lions. I think it's helpful for them that they just use a lot of that different zone coverage against Detroit last week, where, of course, you think of the defense overall as being a little bit more man coverage, being a little bit more of a blitz type unit, but they do have a little bit more in their back. Even if, I mean, I'm not going to pretend like they're the most talented unit. If you look at the defensive unit versus the Eagles offense, you're going to choose the guy on the Eagles offense more times than not in one-on-one matchups. But I do like the way that the Commanders have meshed together. Tage, what do you got as some thoughts for the Commanders defense?
Yeah, I mean, really liked your summary of the Commanders defense there, where have thought that the defensive line has had some nice moments. Both interior and the edge players of just like what they're able to do there. Sanistrell is like a decent corner. The rest of the defense after that, it's like pretty vulnerable. Like they've been good in zone this year. They have not been good in man coverage. They like to play a lot of man coverage, which is like a big reason why they made the Marshawn Lattimore trade. Teams have really loved to run the ball against them. They've had a negative 7% pass rate over expected against this year. So like teams have really just leaned into establishing against the Commanders, which I thought has been interesting. And then another thing that teams have really liked to do against them is just pass in the 5 to 15 air yard area of the field. Like that's definitely a weakness for the Commanders defense. So they've definitely keyed in on that. In the first 2 matchups, they had some success blitzing both Hurts and then Kenny Pickett. Like after Hurts went out in the second game, their success rate lowered, their EPA lowered a little bit against the blitz. So maybe that's something that we see Dan Quinn lean into in this game. But overall, like it'll definitely be a situation where we have the offense that leads the league or in run rate over expected versus the defense that leads the league in run rate over expected. Just like I'm sure there'll be a lot of establishing in this game.
It is going to be established one way or the other. And Tage, I don't know, for some reason when I'm looking at it, just based on some of the film from obviously their 2 matchups, of course, Saquon Barkley is able to generate explosives in both of those games. Even though like the Commanders are who the Commanders are on defense, it just feels like there's a little bit of I don't want to call it a positive matchup on the run game. We just looked at the Lions game where the Lions were able to push those guys around on the interior. I just think the Commanders, like they are taking shots, like they are looking for splash type plays in the run game where you're sending that linebacker through, you're clogging it up inside, you're pushing it to the outside where tight ends are kind of having a struggle. And the Eagles need to be really on top of some of those backside cutoffs, that's what can generate some of those longer runs. Obviously, sometimes it's on the front side, but particularly in zone, when you can cut that back half of the defense off, Saquon can move through that comfortably. But against the Commanders, sometimes there's just a guy right there because they just dump the tight end. So that's, I think, going to be something to monitor. I still have to imagine, Tage, that your positive matchup from the Eagles' perspective, it's got to be like the run game as a whole, right?
Yeah, I mean, definitely run game as a whole. Like if you're to focus on like any particular split, it would just be gap runs. Which is like if you want to look for something in particular in this game, like Eagles have had 0.14 EPA per rush on gap scheme runs, which is the second best in the league, and that's the run scheme. When you look at zone runs versus gap runs versus duo, that the Commanders have been worst against is this gap scheme run game. So I definitely think that's something that we'll see the Eagles lean into in this game.
Yeah, I certainly think because the Commanders, they at times want to play kind of 5 down type fronts. That's when you really want to get to a lot of your counter game. I think you'd like to get to some more inside zone type runs, or even, they are running a little bit of outside zone as well to a 4 down front. Well, that's all just because blocking angles and how things are moved, where your center can go. At the same time, the Commanders, they'll start in a 4 down front. They'll present you that open area kind of over one of the guards and then send a linebacker there. So they're doing kind of a good job there. Like early on, obviously, like your eyes go to Saquon Barkley on the TV right away. I do think, watching how those tight ends are able to take on are able to block those defensive ends, or if it's a linebacker in some type of situation, I think seeing that early on will be something to look at as well. Tage, what do you think positive matchup is here for the Commanders defense?
When Hurts holds onto the ball for over 3 seconds, that'll be something that is probably pretty beneficial for the Commanders defense, because they can create pressure that way with some of the stunts that they do, some of the defensive line talent that they have, even though the Eagles offensive line is obviously really good, but it's also just like the best way of getting this Eagles offense to commit negative plays, because they so rarely have like runs that are stopped for losses, is being able to get to Hurts, being able to sack him, and even put the ball on the ground in the Rams game. So, if you're looking for some variance as the underdog, like you could definitely get that from when Hurts holds onto the ball for a while on his dropbacks.
As the play gets extended, particularly when Hurts, I have to like assume he's not going to be as mobile as usual, right? What the
Mm-hmm.
extent of that is obviously up to be determined. But I like that you mentioned, when you extend a play, that is kind of a way to, I mean, manufacture pressure where your defensive line is probably not going to be able to consistently win against these Eagles offensive linemen, but just, through your coverage unit, through everything up front, you can actually create a pressure just later in the down. For me, it's really that, like I keep talking about 3rd and 6 plus, just situations where the Eagles are and got to have it past situations. And maybe they look at it and say, look, we can just get 3 yards on 3rd down, and then we're just going to go for it on 4th down. So I think that's going to be something to look at in this game. Tage, for me, in terms of just fun matchups, we mentioned the A.J. Brown not having to deal with the snow. That is kind of something that I'm excited for, because I feel like he's going to be off a game, right, where he had, if you want to call them drops, we can call them 2 drops in situations where I think he would have hoped to certainly have had catches at those points. And it feels like he is a bounce back type player where he can still just take over a game. It seems like certainly is not 100%. He's on the injury report constantly with, I think it's a banged up knee that he has. So seeing what he's going to be at in terms of obviously health, in terms of movement, but watching him, whether it's reps against Marshawn Lattimore in this game, I think that's something I'm really looking forward to. What's something that you're looking forward to in terms of just a kind of a fun idea for the Eagles offense?
Yeah, when Saquon gets to the second level, like just like the way that the link, just like the decibel level just like increases when he just like, even when he gets a handoff, but when he like breaks it through the initial line and gets to the second level, it's just like, it's like super cool to hear on TV. I'm sure it's like an amazing experience in person there. So like, yeah, when that happens for the Eagles in this game, like it'll be pretty huge for them for sure.
I mean, the second Rams touchdown, once he was probably like 3 yards downfield. I was like, like 100% touchdown. Just like not a doubt in my mind. So there's obviously, I mean, we have like some like AI models in terms of like expected yards. What about like the expected yards based on vibes? It's always really high, just because he's able to really, really get that. Really, the 3rd level is so quick. And I think the way that the Eagles force you to kind of get heavy inside, it reduces the amount of kind of layers in your defense you have. But even if you have 2 safeties and there are guys there, I mean, Saquon can just really break those tackles. I'm really going to be interested in if it's a spread to run kind of type game where instead of 12 personnel, you're leaning into more 11. You're getting things kind of maybe a little bit more to the outside. I still feel like, I mean, the Eagles' interior offensive line matches up well with everyone. There just have been some times, specifically against the Commanders, where they'll stunt away from Mekhi Becton at right guard and kind of find a way to like get him kind of leaning in the wrong direction and create that tackle for a loss. I want to talk real quick about Mikey Sanders still, where he, I think, embodies the opportunistic defense type approach, where obviously those interceptions against at least the interception in the end zone, particularly against the Lions, where he's undercutting that ball. I really like, I think, watching him play because he is not your typical kind of cornerback size profile. And I think in the draft process, people could have looked at him and be like, man, this guy's like not going to be a good cornerback. But to see him constantly improve, I think that's been something that I'd like to watch this season.
Yeah, I'm right there with you where, like they kind of were experimenting with his alignment through the first half of this year. I thought like the play that he made to pick off Jared Goff in the end zone when he was guarding Jameson Williams was like an amazing play. So like I'm really excited to see him in this game because they're definitely going to need him to have a big game in coverage and in some of those matchups we were talking about when, especially when like the Eagles are getting rid of the ball quickly.